not the most advisable bear etiquette here, but it is a song that a lot of us probably know growing up and camping. And this song is called I Met a Bear. And the way this works is it's a call and response song. So we get in the correct key here. And it goes a little something. So we're going to go the other day, and then you go the other day. I met a bear.
I met a bear.
A great big bear.
A great big bear.
Right over there.
Right over there.
And then we all repeat the stanza together. The other day I met a bear. A great big bear right over there. He looked at me.
He looked at me.
I looked at him.
I looked at him.
He sized up me.
He sized up me.
I sized up him.
I sized up him.
He looked at me. I looked at him. He sized up me. I sized up him. He said to me.
He said to me.
Now listen, son.
Now listen, son.
I think it's time.
I think it's time.
You ought to run.
You ought to run.
He said to me. Now listen, son. It's time. You ought to run. Don't ever run. And so I ran.
So I ran
Away from there.
away from there.
But right behind
Right behind
me was that bear.
me was a bear.
And so I ran away from there. But right behind me
was that bear.
But up ahead,
But up ahead
there was a tree.
there was a tree.
A great big tree.
A great big tree.
Oh, glory be.
Oh, glory be.
But up ahead there was a tree. A great big tree. Oh, glory be. The lowest branch
The lowest branch
was 10 feet up.
was 10 feet up.
I'd have to trust
I'd have to trust
my luck to jump.
my luck to jump.
The lowest branch was 10 feet up. I have to trust my
luck to jump.
And so I jumped
And so I jumped
into the air.
into the air.
But I missed that branch.
I missed that branch.
Oh, way up there.
All the way up there.
And so I jumped into the air. But I missed that branch. Oh, way up there. But don't you fret.
Don't you fret.
Nor don't you frown.
Don't you frown.
'Cause I caught that branch
Cause I caught that branch.
on my way down. But don't you fret, nor don't you frown, 'cause I caught that branch on my way down. This whole ordeal might have been stopped
I have been stopped.
had I kept my food
I kept my food
in the bear box. This whole ordeal might have been stopped had I kept my food in the bear box. All right. Thank you so much. All right, can we get everyone to rub your hands together real quick? It's making a little wind right now. Go ahead and snap your fingers. Slap your lips. It's the rain. Stomp your feet. That's the thunder. It gets quieter, quieter. Back to the wind. And it gets quieter. We'll use that again a little later. I just want to make sure you all have it down. The way this is going to work is we tell the Redwood stories. We have some cue cards here. And when we say, or when we hold up this card, you just say what's on the card. So let's give it a try real quick.
Crash.
Excellent. So we're going to be talking about some thunder and lightning and falling trees and floods and fires. And sometimes we'll need those sound effects and we'll need your help. So tonight we're going to learn the Redwood story. An ever-living legacy of endurance. Now each Redwood tells a story if we take the time to listen. In the life of a redwood tree, well, this redwood might overcome unspeakable odds and challenges to reach those massive sizes and those incredible heights and live those long, long lifespan that a redwood tree lives. Tonight we're going to be following the life of one tree named Paulo. And we're going to see how this tree overcomes fires and floods, and stands in the path of people. And we'll see how this tree does have a story to tell us, a story of endurance. When we start talking about Paulo, though, you're going to see that Paulo is a survivor, even before this tree even sprouts from the ground. Because Paulo is a member of a family that has very few of the species left. Paulo is part of the family Taxodiaceae. And Taxodiaceae was a family of redwood trees, or redwood-like trees, that covered much of the northern hemisphere of the planet and extended far and wide. We have evidence of this family of trees through fossils and petrified wood, like the one in this picture here in Yellowstone National Park. Now, these trees were abundant, and they emerged around the Middle Jurassic period. So, pretty close to dinosaur time when these trees first appeared. We have evidence through fossils in places like Asia and Europe, still today, of these trees existing. But over time, climates changed, continents drifted, and the interior parts of continents became drier and less habitable or hospitable for redwood trees, or for these ancestors of the redwoods. So today there's only 3 surviving members, 3 surviving species of the family Taxodiaceae. And those surviving members are clinging to very small habitat ranges. One is the dawn redwood. The dawn redwood is found in the Hubei province of China. It loses its leaves during the wintertime, so it's the only member of the redwood family that does that. It's not very tall, but it was a tree that people thought was extinct until the 1920s, when it was identified as a relative to the redwoods. And today you can actually find a dawn redwood planted in this particular area, right here in front of the visitor center. So you can actually find more dawn redwoods probably planted in parks and places all over the world than you can in their original habitat in China. Another cousin of the redwoods is the giant sequoia. Sequoia dendron giganteum is the scientific name. And this tree, because of its massive size, has earned the record of the largest living thing on the planet. Now, this tree is only found in the Sequoia, or in the Sierra Nevada mountains, in an area about 4,000 to 6,000 feet elevation. So if anyone's looking for a giant sequoia around here, the only place you're going to find one is actually also planted right there next to this campfire sign. So there's one giant sequoia. Otherwise, their habitats don't intermingle. And the final member of this great family of trees is the coast redwood, the trees that we're surrounded by today. And these trees cling to just a small area of Central California coastline, all the way up to about southern Oregon. It's about a 500-mile-long belt of forest that extends no farther than 30 miles from the coast. This is a place where we find enough summer fog and enough winter rain for this forest to exist. It's a very small belt. And the only reason we find it here is because it's just the right conditions, just the right mild climate for these trees to exist. So when you step into a redwood forest, it's kind of like you're stepping back in time. You're getting a window into a time close to the time of dinosaurs. So even before our tree, Paulo, is even sprouting from the earth, it is already a survivor, one of the last remnants of its kind. Now, when Paulo starts its life, it's going to endure many challenges. One of the biggest challenges is how these redwood trees actually start. Because a redwood tree might start as a seed, or a redwood tree might start as a clone. We'll talk about both ways. Now, if the redwood tree starts as a seed, it's going to be within a cone, and these redwood cones are no larger than the tip of your thumb. So the redwood cones are very small. And a redwood cone might hold about 160 seeds. And these seeds are about the size of a tomato seed. It's hard to believe that a seed that small could eventually sprout into the world's tallest living thing. It's just one of the many amazing things about the redwood trees. Now, one of the challenges is that a single redwood, though it may drop about 1 million seeds in a year, most of these seeds will not sprout because the ground is covered in litters, or leaf litter, called duff. And this can be a foot thick of just piled up dead leaves. insects and rodents might eat these seeds before they even sprout. Another way that redwoods can grow is through cloning themselves. So redwoods have mastered cloning long before we have ever been able to develop the technology to do that. All along the base of the redwood tree, there are dormant buds beneath the bark that can sprout. If you've ever seen a redwood tree with a large growth on it called a burl, that is an area where the tree might be able to sprout new trees or branches. So you get some pretty impressive formations if a tree falls down. You might see new trees sprouting from all along the log. You might get these interesting features of almost a comb-like structure of trees growing. And you'll get rings of trees. Some of these you probably see in the campgrounds around there. A lot of the trees were cut there maybe a little less than a century ago, and the trees have grown in what are called fairy rings or redwood family circles. Now, whichever way that Paulo begins its life, it's going to experience another challenge. And that is the challenge that its elders have created because the redwood canopy, the roof of the forest, is dark. Not much light is able to get down. So these trees are creating a roof over the forest, a dark, cool place. Makes it hard for these trees to grow tall. So Paulo is going to have a hard time getting very tall, except that fortunately for Paulo, in a winter storm, one of the neighboring giant redwoods has fallen to the earth.
Crash!
Smashing to the earth, and it has opened up a patch of sky. And in this sunny patch, Paulo is able to grow much quicker. These redwood trees can grow 2 to 3 feet in a year, so that by the time a redwood tree is 2 or 3 years old, it is already taller than most of us. Now, Paulo will start to grow quickly. By the time Paulo is about 100 years old, it's already 200 feet tall. But it's still very young, and it still has a lot to experience. Over the centuries, and over really the decades, this tree is going to experience events like floods pretty often. How many of you, raise your hand, have made it down to the Eel River, to the river right down here? A few of you. All right, so if you've gone down there, you've probably seen that it is a pretty shallow river, pretty mild. But in the wintertime, in our winters, we can get 50 to 100 inches of rain a year. Our winters are going to cause this river to rise to the point where even the campground, most of the campground would have been about 13 feet underwater. So this river can become a raging torrent. And so during Paulo's life, early on, a flood begins to cause the river to swell. Swoosh. And the flood waters creep into the redwood forest and right into where Paulo is growing. Now, the flooding might seem kind of destructive, and it can be because the soil can be very loose and very soft from all this flooding, and if the winds are powerful in some of these storms, then these trees might be pulled to the earth.
Crash!
And if they crash, then, of course, it's going to maybe make an opportunity for other trees to grow. But in Paulo's case, it's able to keep surviving and standing tall because it, like other redwoods, has a defense. Though their roots are very shallow, the redwood roots stretch over 50 feet in all directions and can tangle with other redwood roots. And so these trees support one another. Redwoods grow well in a family, just like we tend to survive well in families. And it can be a perilous life for the redwood trees that live on their own by themselves, whether it be in a city or whether it be maybe in the far reaches of the redwood habitat. So the winter comes to an end and the rivers begin to lower. The environment dries out a little bit. Our spring can be pretty mild, cool weather, but our summers here in California are very dry. We don't have much rain, which is very different than a place like South Florida. Our rainy time is mostly in the winter. So our summers are dry, and in these dry summertime, occasionally an electric storm might make its way in the redwood forest. Lightning strikes a ridgetop.
Boom!
And if this lightning strikes maybe a dead tree or an area of brush, it might ignite into a fire. Many of our summer fires especially here in northern coastal California, start because of lightning strikes in the mountains. And if a lightning fire does occur, it can creep its way down the ridges. And in the past, redwoods experienced fires 5 to 20 years at a time. Very common, and you've probably seen scars of fires in the redwoods around here. So redwoods were a common phenomenon. These fires could make their way down into the redwood groves, into the valleys, eating all the underbrush and all of the dead debris that is gathered at the bottom here, claiming everything in its path, except for the redwoods. Because redwoods, like Paulo, have a defense. In Paulo's life, it has started to develop really thick bark. If you've ever touched the sides of a redwood bark, it's very spongy, almost a foot thick at certain ages. And this bark holds a lot of moisture, and so these redwoods are able to withstand fire. And that's why you see fire markings, but a lot of the trees are not fully burned. Now, if there's a lot of debris at the bottom of Paulo, in this case there was. And so Paulo began to hollow out because the fire burned long enough to pierce through the bark. Paulo now has a hole. But fortunately, unlike many trees, this tree with a hole is going to be able to survive just fine because Paulo is also full of tannic acid, which helps it resist rot. One of the reasons that people used redwoods for outdoor furniture and for the shingles of houses was because its wood was very rot resistant. So Paulo is going to keep being able to survive even though this fire has hollowed it out. And now, in the coming years, this hole, which we sometimes call a goose pen, is going to become a habitat for many species. Can anyone think of an animal that might live in a hole like this? Yes, back. Maybe a snake. Snake might hang out in there a little bit, especially in the sunnier areas, the more warm areas of the park. Yeah.
Skunk.
Maybe a skunk. Anything else?
How about a Keebler elf?
A Keebler elf. That definitely could make an entire factory in there of cookies. Anything else? Yeah.
Bear.
A bear. Yeah, so maybe some bigger mammals. Of course, it's a cave, so bats could also live in there. Bats and bears and skunks. And an animal that might be hard to see. In fact, I'm really sorry about that. This animal, you might be able to see its shape right here. Very dark. It's the Humboldt marten we talked about earlier. They make their dens in the holes of some of these old redwood trees. They need the old redwood habitat. So Paulo, as it's growing, as it's being burnt by fire, it's also going to experience other things, like windstorms that are going to cause the tops of these trees to snap. Sometimes these windstorms are so powerful that the tops break and another tree might fall and scrape against Paulo. And when a redwood tree gets damaged by wind or gets a top broken off or gets the side of it scraped, it might sprout a new branch, which kind of grows like a brand new tree. It's called a reiterated trunk. They kind of grow like flexing arms. And the older a redwood tree is, the more of these branches it's going to start developing. The more damage it experiences, the more it's going to have these big branches that start to collect dead leaves. And in those dead leaves, animals might make their nests. Plants might grow. The marbled murrelet is a seabird that uses only the branches, these massive reiterated trunks that we find on the older trees. And now Paulo is able to support this bird. You might find, what's this animal, anyone? Flying squirrels. Yeah, you might find flying squirrels also making their homes in these trees, gliding from tree to tree in the dark of night. You also might find the northern spotted owl making its habitat in some of these old trees with the broken tops. And if you're lucky, you might hear the call of a spotted owl. It goes like this. So listen for that. You hear that? So Paulo has become an apartment building for species. But as long as Paulo has been growing, it has also been standing in the path of people as well.
So Paulo, our redwood tree, who we've been following since it was just a tiny little redwood tree, is now over 1,000 years old and has lived amongst humans its entire life. And the native people, like the Yurok or the Karuk or the Sinkyone and Wiyot, have settled amongst the redwood trees and around its barrier. And they consider the redwood as sacred. Because while its wood might be used as materials for a house, or a canoe, or a tool to hunt with, it is also a sacred thing because it has a spirit or a soul. And the native people have also become caretakers of the land, often setting fires.
Crackle.
And these fires help keep the meadow open in order to make it easier for the native people to hunt. And it also promoted new growth, which the native people would then collect later throughout the year. So over Paulo's lifetime, the native people lived in harmony with the redwood trees. But that would soon begin to change when the newcomers arrived. And at first, the Spanish settlers they came to this area and they saw the redwood trees and they exclaimed at the abundance of the redwoods, but they didn't know what they were. So they decided to call them Palo Colorado, which is why Ryan and I decided to name our redwood tree Palo. So eventually, more and more people came to settle in the redwoods. People from all over the world, from Europe and Russia and the eastern U.S., they settled amongst the redwoods. But often, they would violently displace the native people of this land. And at that point, the redwoods became a refuge to the native people. But that part of the story is better told by this member of the Caddo tribe.
Redwood trees served as refuge during the genocide era here. Many people were scattered since there was a bounty on all tribal heads, regardless of your age and your tribal background. So the redwoods was a haven, and no one knew the lands better than the tribal people that lived here. And for the descendants of the Sinkyone and other tribes, mainly the Sinkyone people here, it's an honor to be claimed as part of those descendants because they lived a life where society didn't want them. And redwoods became their salvation, and they never strayed far. Although they were forced to leave the area, they always came back because this is their hunting and gathering grounds where they were born. Their spiritual heart is here, and the trees carry the music to their prayers and their songs.
So we heard in the video, the redwoods were a refuge to the native people. But still, many of them lost their lives and their homes. And a lot of them were forced onto reservations. And at the same time, all this was happening, gold was discovered in California, which increased the demand for lumber and more supplies. And this caused the people that lived here to create new equipment that would be able to cut down these giant trees. And the strong wood of the redwood tree, which had endured so many forces of nature, was not strong enough to endure the crosscut saw, the steam donkey, and the teams of men and oxen that were used to fall these giant trees.
Chop, crash.
And even more events kept happening that would increase the demand for this strong redwood lumber. Like in 1906, a giant earthquake
Rattleshake.
brought down the majority of the city of San Francisco. And once again, the redwood trees were called upon to rebuild the city. And over a mere 150 years, a small amount of time in the life of a redwood tree, our redwoods went from covering about 2 million acres to only about 100,000 acres. Now, luckily, although the redwood trees were not strong enough to endure the demand for lumber, they had a little help along the way.
So, Palo was looking like it was pretty threatened. More and more the sound of logging was coming closer and closer to this tree. But fortunately, even as the trees began to fall, they started to have allies in other people who were concerned about these redwoods. And their legacy lives on because of these people. even as early as the late 1800s or the early 1900s, people began to see the redwoods as a valuable thing to protect. It started with people like John Muir, one of the famous naturalists here in California that revered the redwoods, as well as many other people. And the redwood trees began to be protected. First, groups like the Semper Virens Club helped protect redwoods, and in 1903, the first Redwood State Park was created. It was Big Basin State Park near Santa Cruz. More and more redwood parks began to be created as time went on. In 1918, the Save the Redwoods League emerged. The Save the Redwoods League helped to protect the park that you are camping in tonight. This park was protected starting about 1921, continued to grow and grow as time went on. The Save the Redwoods League have celebrated and are celebrating their 100th anniversary this year. So, people began to see the redwoods differently. And so Paulo had a friend in these people, and Paulo's land got protected. And now, today, people in organizations like the Save the Redwoods League are responsible for the majority of the parks that we have today. We have over 30 redwood state and national parks, and many other county parks and regional parks that protect our redwood trees. So most of the 4.5% of the remaining old-growth forest is protected in parks. The other 96% that was cut down, well, many of them are growing back and are being harvested in longer cycles with more responsibility. And so, fortunately, the redwood's legacy lives on. And more recently, Paulo has started to stir with the commotion of scientists that are now exploring the canopy of this old tree. Paulo is over 1,000 years old now, and on its massive branches, it has an entire ecosystem, an entire forest perched on its crown. And as you can see, there's a lot to explore. This exploration of the redwood canopies only began about 30 years ago. Scientists from Humboldt State University began to climb some of these trees and find a whole entire world above the ground. You can find in these massive branches soil that is basically accumulated from all of the dead leaves that have piled up over the centuries. And in that soil, there's moisture and water. And in that water, now you can sustain things like salamanders that live their entire lives up here. There are copepods, small shrimp-like creatures that live in the water found up in the branches and hollows of some of these trees. Ferns and berry bushes and even small trees are growing on the branches 200 feet off the ground of some of these redwoods. And if you really want to see that, best place to go check it out is up at Prairie Creek Redwood State Park or Jedediah Smith farther north. Those are places where you can really see these features. So Paulo has become, as we said, more than just a tree. And Paulo is offering us a whole new understanding of redwoods and their value. So Paulo's protection and these other redwoods' protection is super important for us to learn things that we maybe would have never known had these trees vanished and been all cut down. So Paulo has survived a lot. Paulo survived and has lived through many events of the world. Whether we could talk about the rise and fall of nations, the American Revolution, the Civil War. Paulo has endured through the invention of the automobile, the electric light bulb, the telephone, the atomic bomb, the internet, all of these different things that have happened in the world Paulo has endured through. But Paulo's story is not over, because this park is always changing, and the forest here is always going through different processes. Paulo eventually will also reach the end of its own story. And that happens one night when the wind begins to blow. And a little drizzle starts to fall upon the forest floor. And then the rains begin to pound. And the thunder begins to roll. And then, in all of this commotion, this tree begins to bow and sway and finally snap loose and come crashing to the earth.
Crash!
And in this cacophony of destruction, smaller redwoods are taken down, tan oaks are brought to the earth, and even maples are leveled. It is destruction, but it comes to an end. And then all is silent. Apollo has fallen. But Apollo's story is still not over. Because in the coming centuries, in the 500 years it might take this tree to fully decompose into soil, it is going to become a nurse log, a tree that sustains other living things. First, soil will develop on this log from all the leaves piling up. Insects will begin to burrow. Mosses and lichens will take hold. And all of these creatures, as they make their homes, are giving Apollo a whole new purpose. Apollo might be home for small vertebrates like salamanders and invertebrates like slugs and insects, or even mammals that might live in the upturned roots. And eventually, a new tree may sprout from this log, whether it's a clone that happens right when the tree falls, or a seedling that lands safely in the soil on top of this log. And this new seedling that takes hold here has a bright future, just like all the seedlings that start in this park. And its future is bright because of people like you and our forebears who supported these places and made sure that they are protected, so that these new trees, the descendants of Apollo, could tell their own story. And may that story be a long story, a story of endurance. So I want to end tonight on a short poem to think about what the redwood's significance is. And it goes like this. An ancient world, cloaked in green, is home to millions of lives that go unseen, where darkness rules and winters dampen, but without these trees, it could not happen. So everyone, I want to thank you so much for visiting and hearing the story of the redwoods. It has been so fun talking to you all, and hopefully you have a great night. Feel free to hang out a little longer if you have any questions, and we'll be happy to talk with you and answer some of those questions. So again, everyone, thank you so much for coming out to hear the Redwood story. Have a great rest of your night.